everyone, Novels Wonderland here. Thank you all for the love and support you've shown me and the channel.
Tensura Reborn as the first Nephilim, Chapter 81-84, it took until shortly after noon the following day, but everything was taken from the castle just as Blake had ordered. In the end a split of the goods was determined between the people of the nearby town and the army. The monetary goods were split roughly 3-1 with the town getting the larger portion. This included things like decorations, fine art, furniture and other material goods alongside liquid capital. The reason for this split was mainly due to the fact that the army could not carry a lot of the heavier stuff if they wanted to be able to move quickly enough. Blake took a good portion of it into his spatial storage as well, but that soon was filled up to his comfortable maximum. Perhaps if he was better at the non-combat applications of spatial magic he could have stored more, but he sadly wasn't, thus resulting in a more limited capacity. The fact that the other goods from the castle took up even more space also contributed to this. For an inverted split of the foodstuffs the castle had gone to the army. This was to help their ration situation with less need to hunt or stop for more food. An army marches on its stomach and Blake knew this well enough. As such 3/4 of the foodstuffs went to the army, with a not insubstantial amount going into Blake's storage to keep it from spoiling. The remaining 1/4 went to the town, enough food to have a feast at the least. Which from what Blake heard was what the town intended to do with it. The food his army had would feed them for about an additional week. While the castle had been stocked for maybe a month-long siege, that was a poor estimate in truth. That estimate was not made with rationing in mind, instead it was enough food for an entire month of the castle's normal food expenditure. And to Blake's complete lack of surprise it turned out that the mastiffs were known to have very large meals and feasts often. This resulted in actually quite the haul of food, something that Blake deemed far more important to riches, hence his decision to split things the way he did. Gold would weigh him down while food would fuel his men, it was the best choice in his mind. Regardless, it all mattered not now, for everything was clear and the castle was empty. All save for 2, of course. You should know, you'll likely be receiving company soon enough in whatever hellscape awaits you. I intend to rid this nation of all your ilk once I take the throne, so perhaps you can take some small comfort in knowing you won't be burning alone for long, Blake said in a voice devoid of his usual warmth, and filled only with a cold ice of disgust for the men before him. Struggling like a tied-up pig was Lord Mastiff himself, gagged to prevent the men from saying anything that could make Blake decide to kill him here, and now just to shut him up. The men had been spewing filth before this, especially when he saw the slaves he had kept in the dungeon being treated for all their wounds. That dungeon was where they were in this moment, far beneath the castle where no light would reach them. The 2 of them were the only souls left in the entire grounds, but Blake wanted the men here specifically. Lord Mastiff was bruised and bloody, some of his bones broken likely, though Blake didn't truly care. He wasn't the cause of the man's injuries after all, that honor had gone to some of the more physically healthy slaves who wanted some revenge. Blake had allowed them some catharsis, with the only true limit being they couldn't kill or maim the men. He had something far more fitting in mind. So, without even a single look back at the man's bound form, no matter how loud the muffled screams became, Blake left the dungeon. The young king took a slow walk out of the grounds, looking at the barren castle with eyes made of ice. Not too much time passed before he arrived back with his army, maybe 15 minutes at most. The walk only took this long due to him asking his army to be at least a few miles away from the castle for what he was about to do. "Is everything ready, my liege?" Richard asked, formality covering his voice for the men's benefit more than anything. Blake merely nodded before giving a short order. "Don't distract me for this next part," was all he said, his voice laced with a certain authority that made it clear it wasn't a request. Richard and the others merely nodded, and watched on as Blake closed his eyes in focus. At first nothing seemed to be happening, that was until swords began to spawn in the air. Blade after blade shimmered into existence midair, first 10, then dozens, then hundreds. In a short few minutes thousands of swords were floating in the air, each one identical to the last. The swords were made to have a basic hilt, and were made in the style of a longsword with the metal having a faint orange hue to it. At first no one was sure where their king was going with this. Then Blake opened his eyes and held his arm out as if issuing orders to the army of steel he'd conjured. The blades flew forth, covering the distance between them and the castle incredibly fast. Looking on, they saw the swords hanging in the sky above the castle, the sky blanketed with them as if they were trying to stop the sun from ever shining on that place again. Blake then let his hand drop and the blades fell like comets striking the earth, embedding themselves into the stone and grounds of the castle the mastiffs had called home for centuries. Still the army and the crowd from the town were confused as to the point of all this. That was until the king spoke but one word. Detonate. The moment the word was spoken, a shockwave came from the place where once the castle stood. Fire and explosions rocked the land in the distance, the sound something that none there would forget. It was destruction incarnate, like the wrath of an angry god had landed upon the castle in judgment of all the atrocities committed there. The world shook for them all, some even wondering if the explosion had somehow caused an earthquake from how badly everything shook. When the fire and dust cleared, though, they were all left speechless at the sight before them. Where once a mighty castle stood, now naught but rubble remained. Scorched stones and melted earth were all that was left, a ruin that was made by the act of a single man. The man that stood before them all with a face carved out of stone. May you be buried with the old world, and rot in the place you left so many to suffer in, Blake thought in regard to the man he'd left in the dungeons, now having buried him in tons of rock and earth to never return to the light of the surface. A fate the man had subjected so many others to, now his own. Blake then stepped forward and turned around to face the crowd. He raised his voice to be heard by them all, and not a single "I" did not train itself to him in that moment. This is the fate for all that practice slavery, for all that think that merely their race or status of birth entitles them to treat others as lesser, as things to be played with, whose lives are expendable and something to be taken away on a whim. For those who took their position of power as license to do as they wished rather than the responsibility that it is buried beneath the earth to rot as the new world prospers above them. For I shall bury the old world that has allowed this to go on, and all those that wish to fight for it to stay with it. Let this forevermore serve as a reminder to this fact, to this vow of mine, and a reminder as to the consequences that such actions hold. He shouted out to the crowd, the entire group, soldier and townsperson alike, seeming to hold their breath as he spoke. Once he finished his speech, Blake didn't wait around, not waiting for any reaction to his words nor seeking any recognition. So he moved to head back to his tent to get some rest, when a sound stopped him dead in his tracks. The sound of clapping reached his ears, his eyes searching out the sound and quickly finding it. The clapping came from a small child, demi-human, a former slave of the mastiffs. They had a scar on their throat that showed him clearly the child's inability to speak, their face lined with stress, but a gleam in their eyes that seemed to speak of something greater. Then, as if the small child's actions were some kind of signal, the crowd began to clap and cheer. Blake's name was chanted by the people, men in his army kneeled as if to show their loyalty. Blake did not smile, did not give nothing more than a nod at the crowd, and a second towards the child with the ruined throat before continuing on his way. His inner circle fell in around him as he moved into his tent, none saying a word as they filed in. He then took the head position at the table they used for strategizing, not sitting down yet, and instead leaning with his hands upon the table. "Speak, I know you must have questions," he said once he noticed none would speak unless he said so. They all shifted slightly in their seats for a while before Noctis spoke up after clearing his throat. "We are not questioning you necessarily, we just have some things we wished for a bit more detail on. Such as why you decided to destroy the castle instead of leaving it to be taken over after your accession to the throne. Without something like that here, the town is likely to lose out on much trade and shrink, making the ruin one that is left with none to see it. It is a powerful statement, but one that will fade as less and less people live near it and see it," the Lord explained, not wishing to call the decision short-sighted to his face, but strongly implying it with his words. Blake smiled, not his normal smile, but one of vindication that made them all swallow. "I have a plan for that actually. This place is close to the northern border, in fact it's not too far from Balakiablamand border. As such, I aim to issue a proper city charter for the town, and make it a trade city. I will funnel in money and set up a military outpost to keep an eye on the border nearby. This will help ensure the place attracts people, potentially becoming one of the nation's major cities. All with the reminder I just made to my stance on slavery right outside the city limits, Blake told them all, getting looks of realization in return at his words. What he didn't tell them was that he had been told that one of the world's largest slave trading organizations, Orthrus, was held up in Wallachia, and made the nation their home base by Lucian. His brother had revealed it among the information of what he remembered of this world from his past life. Blake wanted them to think twice before trying to spread into his country. He knew that his rule would be seen as weak in the beginning after taking power, and many would try and take liberties, both among the world's elite and its worst. This would hopefully serve as a sufficient warning. In later years, the ruin would also serve as a cultural landmark, possibly something left over from the nation's history. For he would order the grounds never to be repaired for as long as he lived, the ruin meant to be there for any future generations to see, and know that their king took these things seriously. That was all for the future, however. In the present it would serve as a moral hit to Blake's enemies for taking the throne. An advantage he would try to leverage in due time. I see, that is a good idea. The borders will need to be watched once this is all over anyway. Southwest making this place a trade and military city is a good idea. Though I'm unsure who all will be willing to trade with us after this, Noctis said consideringly. Blake smiled once more, far more like himself and setting everyone more at ease. Let me worry about that for now. Trust me, we'll have trade partners when the time comes, the young king reassured him. Blake only felt comfortable making such a promise due to the fact that he knew that Alex was collecting blackmail material on many of the prominent merchants, and the noble houses from their neighboring nations that were set up along the border of the nation of Malstance. This would let them leverage this information to make them forget any hesitation in trading with them. From what the demon had spoken of, they'd already had a few good prospective partners picked out, including a noble in Wallachia that they could likely lean on heavily since they had evidence that they had committed treason. Things like that would be a powerful card to hold at the negotiating table. I'm just glad they're on our side, Blake thought, unknowingly echoing the same thought that many in the room held about him. Lucian looked around at the remaining demon lords as they all sat at their places at the circular table the meeting had been held at. Guy's servants were taking dishes to each of the demon lords, all plated on elegant fine china, or this world's equivalent. The dishes were all made of high-quality ingredients such as meat from rank monsters, plants that grew only in the harshest of conditions, and alcohol that was older than some countries. Apparently Guy liked to bring out some of his personal collection when a new demon lord was named, the case with Rimuru in canon likely having been an exception due to the new alcohol he'd offered for them to try. In this case though, Lucian had a wine poured into his glass that was more easily measured in centuries than years. How it had been persevered that long he wasn't sure, though thankfully it hadn't been aged for nearly that long. Such would have made it more akin to vinegar than wine after all. After taking a sip though, he could tell that it was a fine red wine with a full flavor that he quite enjoyed when paired with the hearty stew being served. It appears that Guy has a good taste in food, though I imagine he has had plenty of time to collect the greatest of recipes this world has to offer with how long he's lived, Lucian thought to himself with a chuckle. Conversation soon broke out amongst the demon lords, mostly between those who were next to each other. Fry happened to be his closest neighbor at the table, likely due to her being the newest demon lord besides him at the table now. As such he wasn't surprised when she leaned over some and began talking to him. I'd like to offer my congratulations on your ascension to demon lord. It is also to my understanding that you shall also be taking over the rulership of Eurasania as well. I hope we can be good neighbors after this, the Harpy Queen said, her voice seeming full of quiet confidence that Lucian almost didn't see through. He could however hear the unsaid part of her words. The probing on what his plans were for after this now that he had a country under him. A country with a well-known military force and a might makes right mentality in its populace. In a way it could be seen as him having won a fully trained and ready military force after having just deposed a demon lord. Through keeping this in mind, Lucian was aware of the hidden question in her words. You have an army now and have already taken down one demon lord, am I to be next? Was the question in short. Thankfully for her he had no intention of making her fears a reality. As such, Lucian held out his glass towards her and dipped his head. I fully intend to be and hope to have a favorable relationship moving forward. I hope in time perhaps some more formal agreements can be made after I've gotten my new house in order, if you will, he said to her, his best charming smile on his face that seemed to set the harpy a bit more at ease. She clinked her glass with his, and they both took a sip of the red liquid within them. Fry sat back then and studied him, crossing her legs slowing as she thought over what to say seemingly. She took one more sip before setting her glass down, and opening her mouth to speak again. Are you speaking of a possible formal alliance, Lord Lucine? How odd, a man who took a demon lord's throne by force now wishes to make an alliance with the rest. I see your new title is truly fitting indeed, the vixen of a woman said with a coy smirk on her face. Lucian laughed at that, taking the joke in the good-natured fun it was meant in. I have to agree with you there, the title is truly a perfect match. But to answer your question, yes I do indeed. Not just with yours mind, but some of the others as well should I have the chance to. You however are my closest neighbor, and thus it is more prudent for what is now my country to make inroads to an alliance with you and yours, he told her truthfully as he ate some more of his food. Fry seemed almost taken aback at how blunt he was in his answer, Lucian's temperament seeming to be something she wasn't used to among her contemporaries. The Nephilim honestly enjoyed throwing her off balance like that. She regained herself quickly though, and went on. Oh, then I shall look forward to hearing from you after you have gotten your affairs in order then. Though I must admit to being curious as to who else you wish to make inroads with besides myself, she asked with all the grace of someone with the title of Queen Bears. Lucian looked at her consideringly before shrugging, and deciding to answer honestly. He saw no harm in doing so after all. If I were to say my next target so to speak would be Demon Lord de Gruel. You see, I have a half-giant subordinate born of a giant father and ogre mother, and I wish for him to be able to perhaps visit the man's domain in hopes of finding his father. It is something he wishes to do, and I think getting a greater understanding about the other half of his family would be good for him, Lucian told her, getting an odd look in response to his words. Though Frey's reaction paled in comparison to de Gruel himself, having evidently overheard their conversation. The man looked shocked, eyes wide and a stunned expression on his face. His glass slipped from his hands and spilled the wine across the table somewhat before being quickly taken care of by the nearby rain. The man then spoke up, clearly addressing Lucian as he spoke. How old is your subordinate? He asked, words somewhat stilted as he asked. Lucian found it somewhat odd but soon remembered what Petra had said of the man having a similar aura to Surtur. As such he answered honestly once more in hopes of understanding what was going on. I believe he's about 20 years old, give or take a couple years, Lucian told him, getting a strange reaction in response. De Gruel sighed and seemed to sink in his chair at the words, not out of relief but out of a form of tiredness. Before Lucian could ask what was with the man's reaction he spoke on his own to explain. I make sure to keep track of all the giants in my territory, which is all the giants there are. I know of only one giant that was away and visiting the area near where the ogres lived as of that time. He said as he dragged a hand down his face. Lucian naturally asked the question anyone would in this situation. Who was it? The silver-haired man asked with interest as he leaned forward some. De Gruel let out one last sigh before responding. A giant by the name of Glassord, my younger brother. A/N, just wanted to let everyone know that on this site the previous chapter was accidentally posted incorrectly, and the begging part of it was not included. It has since been fixed, so I recommend going back to read that part of the previous chapter. Sorry about the inconvenience and the mistake, and I appreciate your understanding in this. The revelation that Lucian seemingly had de Gruel's nephew serving under him was a shock to many of those that were present there in the room. Carrion especially was surprised, having met the man before, and not having guessed at all that the fire giant was related to the earthquake. He knew that the man was strong, and any that were directly related to him was likely going to be quite strong as well. And now the guy that had beaten him, and was the new ruler of his nation, was confirmed to have such a person serving under them with a palpable loyalty. What is this guy's luck? Carrion thought to himself with a shake of his head from his position standing behind his new lord. Carrion was a bit surprised at how easily the thought of calling Lucian his lord came to him. He hadn't been lying or holding any true resentment when he'd sworn loyalty to the Mun not but half an hour ago, but how quickly he came to refer to the Mun as such even in his own thoughts was not typical of him. But Carrion knew himself well, and that led to him knowing that this was simply the product of his own sense of honor and code. Lucian proved himself stronger than him, and once who could show mercy to a former foe. Such a Mun was more than worthy of being his new lord. Some may call such a thought process simple, Carrion called it common sense. Strength in such abundance was a rare quality, when paired with the capacity for mercy even more so. One did not shun such a rare chance to serve one with both qualities because of pride or ego, at least he didn't think one should. Perhaps it was in part due to the survival instinct that his beast side gave him that influenced his thinking. To be honest, Carrion didn't care. What he cared about was helping wherever he could to aid his new lord in ruling the nation he'd been presiding over for centuries. The conversation carried on while the Beastmaster was lost in thought, something not like him at all as the looks from Albiz and Sophia showed. He gave them a comforting grin before focusing back on the talks between the demon lords. As such, I'd be more than glad to host a delegation of your people, Lord de Gruel. Just give me some time to get things in order with the change in leadership, and I'll be ready for whoever you send my way. Does 3 months' time sound good to you for a date? Lucian said, his voice sounding a bit like one of the human nobles that had tried to negotiate with him in the past, though far more genuine than that man had been. De Gruel nodded along to the suggestion of a date, and to Lucian prioritizing getting his lands in order first before playing any political games. Clayman was known to try and play his games before all else, so the difference found in Lucian was likely a breath of fresh air for the Mun. That sounds more than reasonable, and rest assured I will compensate you for hosting my people on such short notice. It's the least I can do for having imposed this upon you so shortly after assuming your title and joining the Demon Lord Council, the giant said with a kind smile that was a bit odd to see on the man's face. Though Carrion figured that, from the story Lucian told about his meeting with Surtur, saving the man's nephew made the Mun far more welcoming to the Nephilim. De Gruel was surprisingly concerned with manners right now with Lucian compared to his normal self, likely due to that. Nearly demanding that he host a delegation from him so soon after becoming a new demon lord and new ruler of a territory was rude to say the least, but typically being rude was not something demon lords cared about. Unless you were friends or were considering an alliance. But even a demon lord would not treat someone who saved a family member rudely on purpose, especially when not expecting a reward of any kind. Fry, for instance, would certainly treat anyone who aided her daughters well as an example. Carrion also believed that should he ever have children, as unlikely as it was for him at this point, he knew any that would save one of his cubs would be treated with all due courtesy. It could be surprising for humans to understand, but most monsters actually had a stronger sense of family than humans do on average. This was due to many factors, most pressing of which being the risks associated with procreation, and how rare offspring could be for some races of monsters. He knew lycanthropes were very protective of family, in particular due to their animal sides encouraging their instincts. Especially mothers. He still shivered sometimes remembering what he'd seen a bear lycanthrope mother do to an angel that tried to harm her baby back in the Tenma War. He was also pretty sure he had her still as a part of his army after seeing that and recruiting her personally. Someone capable of that had no business being a mere farmer in his eyes. Regardless, the conversation moved on from there, the topics moving from one to the next in a nice flow that was typical of these gatherings. When Malim or Ramiris had called this a glorified tea party back when he first joined, Carrion hadn't believed them, but that truly was what most Walpurgis meetings turned into in the end. Speaking of Malim, though, it seemed that something about her new subordinate had caught the attention of his new lord. "Hey Malim, would you be kind enough to introduce your attendant? She looks awfully familiar to me," Lucian asked with an inquiring look that seemed to hold more to it than Carrion expected. That made him curious what his new lord was getting at, and so he made sure to pay special attention to the coming conversation. Lucian looked at the redhead standing behind Malim, and had the desire to sigh deeply in that moment. Part of him hoped that he was wrong, and they were just someone who looked similar, but he thought that may be too much to ask. She looked too much like the character he remembered, and the fact that she was standing behind the Dragon Princess was not helping to disprove his observation here. That's Irene, no doubt about it, he thought to himself, but still asked the question to Melim anyway. Perhaps he was doing so in hopes of a miracle, and being proven wrong. Perhaps he was secretly a masochist, and he didn't know until now, even after dying. This is Irene. She's super smart and been a lot of fun to have around lately since she showed up a few years ago. She's even been trying to get the Dragon Faithful to cook better food lately, though Midray is being stubborn about it. She happily told him the woman's name before going on a bit of a tangent about food. As she talked more about how great Irene was, seemingly the woman had won the Dragonoid over with a hearty stew she'd made out of a dragon that had attacked her. Lucian looked at the woman in question. The redhead held a royal bearing that fit with what he knew of her, having previously been a queen of a nation before. Lucian was curious though as to when she had been taken from the world of fairy tale, mainly if she'd already given birth to and given up Ariza yet. It was likely that she had, but he didn't know for sure. Regardless, it wasn't like he could just ask though. That would not only be very rude, and she was unlikely to answer. But more so it could reveal some of what he knows about other worlds before he was ready to with some of those present. What Guy would do if he found out was honestly his main concern due to him being the mediator. Lucian wasn't sure how the Mun would react, and if he would deem it a threat to the balance he'd been maintaining or not, and he wasn't willing to test it out while he was still so much weaker than the Mun. In the end though he dropped it, and let the conversation flow on. He got along well enough with most of his new colleagues, if one could call them that. Dino slept through most of the meeting, so he didn't get a chance to talk much with the Mun. Something he hoped to fix later on since he had something he wished to speak with the Fallen about. Perhaps I'll ask de Grol to send him as part of the delegation since he does owe the Mun for staying rent-free in his territory, he thought to himself when considering the sleeping ruler. Fry seemed personable and willing to get along with him if a bit on edge for reasons that were clear to him and most others there. De Grol was nice, seemingly he won some brownie points with the Mun due to the Surtur situation. Ramiris and he didn't talk much during the meeting, in part due to her maintaining her act, and due to her talking in hushed words with Guy for most of the meeting. Roy though was the only one that was somewhat annoying to talk to, and thus he tried to ignore him for the most part. Roy came across as arrogant and unfriendly to everyone present. Not enough to start anything, but enough where Lucian suspected many here had had the thought to punch the Mun. Lucian wondered how much of that was an act to ward off other demon lords from wanting to go near him, and the territory he ruled, and how much was the man's real personality. Either way, the warding off of the others was effective to say the least, considering even he wanted almost nothing to do with him, even with the knowledge of who really pulled his strings, and the value to be found there in a possible alliance. Melim meanwhile ended up being the one who talked the most with him besides Fry. It seemed she was intrigued in him for some reason, something that only became clear later that evening. The meeting had concluded and people were leaving one by one. Lucian made sure to send off a thought communication to two of the departing figures, getting a nod back from one and no reaction from the other. Melim came up to him though, and put her hands on her hips before boldly asking him a question that made him come up short. "Hey Lucian, why do you feel like a dragon that forgot how to be a dragon?" She asked him with a childlike grin on her face, and innocent curiosity in her voice. Lucian almost stumbled from the strange question, and noticed how the few remaining demon lords, Guy, Ramiris and Fry, looked at him after she asked that. It seemed they wanted to hear the answer now that who could be considered the dragon expert had asked such a question. He took a moment to think about what she could mean before putting it together. Seeing no harm in answering her, and wanting to build a rapport with her anyway, Lucian answered honestly. "I think that would be due to my complete draconic core skill, Melim," he told her, calling her by her name upon her instance. Apparently she didn't want anyone on the council to be all stuffy with her. Upon her questioning look at his words, Lucian explained more in depth what the skill did, and how it worked. As he described it, Melim seemed to get more and more excited, and her energy was contagious. This ultimately resulted in him sharing more than he intended to initially, and he mentioned how he was putting some of his dragon factor into Gram since the sword seemed to take it in so well. When he showed her the blade in question, she had literal stars in her eyes. "That's so cool. You're almost like me in a way, a dragon with a more humanoid form and stuff," she exclaimed, Irene having a motherly smile from where she stood behind the pink-haired girl at her excitement. Lucian meanwhile rubbed the back of his head at her reaction in embarrassment. "I wouldn't go quite that far, Melim. I'm still far from being a dragon in any real way, I feel," he told her, and that seemed to make her stop in her tracks. Melim put on a thinking face as she considered what he said before she brightened up. It seemed she'd come to some kind of conclusion, one that resulted in her saying something whose results were far beyond what any of them could have expected. "Then as the Dragon Princess, I Melim Nava name you, Lucian Silver, the first ever honorary dragon," she shouted out, and the moment she finished those words the world seemed to stand still for him. "Notice, the one called Melim Nava has shown intent to add to your name. Do you wish to accept this request?" Petra said to him then, her voice far more like Puriel's in that moment than it had been before. Lucian was left with only one thought in his mind at the prompt before him. De Gruel stepped out from the gate back into his quarters. The room he entered was made for his larger size, and in some ways felt far too big. That was more due to the fact that this room had once belonged to both him and his wife many years ago. Ever since her death he hadn't the heart to change a thing, even if it did make her absence all the more clear to him whenever he entered the room. But now wasn't a time to think back on his grief like he wanted to do sometimes. No, he had something far more important to do. As such he went to the door and opened it in order to speak to the attendant that was stationed there. "Call my brother, we have much to speak on. Tell him it's urgent," he gave the order to the woman in maid attire, soon running off to do just as he'd instructed. He sat down on one of the wooden chairs he'd had specially ordered to be made in order to handle his weight, a sigh leaving his lips that came from deep in his chest. De Gruel thought on what he'd just learned in that meeting, of the nephew he'd never met now serving his new contemporary. The memory of the story Lucian told him of how the boy had been found, fighting against some humans for his life, made him angry enough to make him want to remind the humans why he was called the Earthquake. De Gruel was a man who valued family, he wanted the best for them in all things. It was why he let his sons be as wild as they were, and why he held no issues with his younger brother traveling as he pleased. After losing his wife the giant had become all the more aware of how much he valued his family, and to hear that he almost lost one more member of it due to him being unknown to any of them made him feel something he hadn't in many years, fear. Fear that he'd almost lost another of his small family. Was bad enough his other brother had to be imprisoned, now his nephew could potentially be alienated from them as well if they weren't careful. The boy, Surtur, he reminded himself of his kin's name, had lost his mother not even a year ago now. He and his mother, from his point of view, had been abandoned by Glassord, and de Gruel was sure there was some resentment in the lad. He knew he'd have some in his place. So now they needed to fix this, but first he needed to speak to Glassord himself. Sure enough though, as the thought came to him the shorter giant came through the doors with a sword tied to his waist like always. He stood before de Gruel, as if waiting for orders. It was not often he'd been called by his brother like this after all, so he was expecting the worst. The demon lord felt that may not be prepared enough considering the situation, speaking as a father himself. "Good, you're here. I'll be blunt, you have a kid, Glassord," de Gruel told him, seeing as the look on his brother's face changed rapidly between emotions. First was disbelief and skepticism, as if thinking he was being punked. Then came shock and fear at what this meant and how this had come to be known. Finally came a look of defeat and sorrow upon his face. "How did you find this out? Are they okay?" Those were the first questions that came from the man's mouth. De Gruel grunted before responding to the questions. "It turns out that the new demon lord, a man by the name Lucian Silver, saved and recruited your son. He's now a subordinate that from the sounds of it is quite loyal to him," he told him, and saw the moment the words crashed into Glassord's mind. "Saved him? Saved him from what?" the shorterman said as his aura pressed down on the room so strongly that lesser monsters may have died on the spot. De Gruel then told him the whole story as he knew it. Of how Lucian met Surtur, how the boy had been named, and was now strong enough to have a pet dragon according to Lucian. Of how they had agreed to De Gruel sending a delegation to Eurysania in 3 months in hopes of establishing a relationship between them, and the one their kin now called Lord. The moment the delegation was brought up, the Glassord interrupted the conversation. "I'm going along, brother," he said, the words as far from a request as could be and echoing more like a fact that the world, let alone he, would need to bend to no matter if they liked it or not. It made him smile honestly, seeing how his brother seemed to care right now. There was more resolve in his brother than there had been in years, his wandering nature having come from his sense of unfulfillment. De Gruel knew. The fact that he now had a son seemed to light a fire in the men that he'd thought long since gone, and it made him happy to see. "Of course you will be. Though you'll have another tag along as well besides some aides and such," the earthquake told his brother. Glassord looked like he couldn't care less who joined him, but decided to ask anyway. "And who will that be, brother?" the giant swordsman asked with a raised eyebrow. De Gruel thought back on the thought communication Lucian had sent him as he'd left, and how he'd agreed to the request. It was the least he could do, and the men owed him anyway, so it was no problem for him. Though Glassord may find some issue with his assigned travel companion. "Dino will be going along with you upon Demon Lord Lucian's request," he told him, getting a groan in return from his brother. Glassord left the room in a near daze, the revelations that had been spoken of in there making his head spin in a flurry of emotions and thoughts. Not only did he now know that he had a son, but he had also been told that his only child had almost died before he could ever meet them. The only silver lining being that the boy had survived by the grace of the new demon Lord Lucian Silver. A man he now owed a great debt to that Glassord knew would take years upon years till he felt it was repaid. The middle sibling of the giant trio that had once been the great Ashura was different from his brothers. Not only was he the shortest, but he was also the only one of them that had chosen a discipline to follow in his life. De Gruel preferred to fight with his fists and raw power, while the less spoken of fen the better. Glassord was a swordsman though, and a dedicated one at that. He traveled this world in disguise in order to train under great sword masters in order to hone his chosen craft. In fact, it had been the reason he was even in the territory of the ogres those years ago, having been looking for the one called the Sword Savant. He never did find the man, instead finding love in the arms of an ogre woman that impressed him with her strength of body and character. They had been together for some time, love had bloomed between them, and in the end that contributed to why he left. Glassord had gained more than just skill through training the sword, but also the sense of honor that the greatest and wisest of his teachers had preached about. His honor demanded he left back home for his love's sake, having seen the looks her people gave her due to them being together. In truth, he feared that they would do something foolish and harm her when he wasn't around, and he couldn't take that risk. So instead he left publicly, never to return in order to avoid that fate, the previous night having been spent in a passionate goodbye with his love after explaining to her his decision. It hurt like hell, a pain he had buried as best he could in the intervening years, but it was necessary, he felt. His love for her was so great he would have fought his brother to ensure a place among them. The only reason he hadn't decided to bring her with him having been the fact that she wouldn't survive going through the Badlands. Now though, Glassord wondered if he had made a mistake in not trying harder to find a solution to that particular problem. It took him till he got to his rooms for his thoughts to go towards the direction of how such a thing was even possible. How could he have a son without knowing? It went against the most basic principles of how procreation worked for beings like them. That thought was soon put to rest in his mind when he remembered one crucial fact. The power difference. Glassord said to himself in his empty room with a heavy sigh. When there was a large and substantial power difference between two parents, things began to change. In particular, when the male was so vastly stronger than his partner. Female monsters bore risks with pregnancy, that was a fact that he knew all too well considering his brother's wife. But contrary to some beliefs, there was a sort of safety mechanism built in. When a woman is substantially weaker than her mate, she takes in far less magicules from them than they normally would in order to not flood themselves with enough magicules to kill themselves. Should this process not happen, then it was very likely that if they took in the normal percentage of magicules such a coupling would take, they would explode or something from the vast amount of energy flooding their unprepared vessel. This was in part why most monster species only mated with others of their species and power level, far less risk involved. This all led to the fact that Glassord as a true giant was far stronger than an ogre, even close to evolving into a Kijin as she was. This must have led to so little magicules being taken from Glassord in comparison to his large reserves that he didn't even notice it. It was entirely possible that the drain from him was even less than the small amount he leaked passively while restraining his aura. This would also explain why his son was a hybrid instead of a pure giant, his mother likely having supplied an equal amount, if not greater amount of magicules before the boy was born. Such was not common. Usually only the dominate donator of magicules had their race passed down, though expectations have been seen before, particularly in the case of dragons both regular and true. The case with the Tengu elder he'd heard about being a great example, since it was said that even though her daughter's father was not a Tengu, the newborn was. That made the case of his son being a hybrid a 1 in a million occurrence, one that was cast out by those same ogres that had made him leave his love, and almost killed by humans. It was with such thoughts in his mind that Glassord made a vow. "Surtur, I swear here and now that I shall do my utmost to make up for my mistakes." The drained man swore to his empty room, words spoken that he knew he would repeat in roughly 3 months' time to the one they were meant for. Till then, though, he had a sword to swing and plans to make. Melim stared at the new demon lord, going over what she had found out. It seemed that this new guy was a lot like her in a way, being both a dragon and not, as well as being a hybrid of 2 different species. It made her intrigued by him, enough so that she said what she said. What she hadn't expected was to hear the words of the world speak to her again, something that hadn't happened in over 1,000 years. "Would you like to add to the individual Lucian Silver's name, and establish a connection to them?" The words were a surprise, but Melim decided to go with the flow here, in part due to her nature and in part due to her curiosity as to what would happen. She was sure that whatever happened she'd be fine anyway, so she wasn't worried about any consequences. If Irene heard her thoughts, though, she was sure she would be in for a lecture on being careless and reckless, though. Thankfully, the woman couldn't read her thoughts. "She thinks so anyway." "Yeah, let's do it." She thought back to the words of the world and felt a drain on her magicules after giving her consent. The power seemed to hang there for a moment, though, as if stuck in transit somehow. It took a moment for her to understand what was going on, even with her Melim eye. From what she could tell, Lucian seemed to have some sort of skill that interrupted the process in order to give him the choice of accepting or declining Melim's actions, something that was incredibly uncommon to have. Normally one would need to exercise their will in order to do such a thing, and that only really resulted in rejecting the process outright, not giving them time to think it over. Melim also highly doubted that this guy had more will than her, though she would admit to being biased there. In the end, though, it seemed that he accepted her adding on to his name, and Melim felt the connection between them snap into place. That was already something interesting, but then she sensed his power grow from the process. It almost felt like something seemed to come together for him, and she was oh so curious as to what had happened. "I have a feeling that this guy is going to be a lot of fun," Melim thought to herself as she watched his reaction to what had just happened. Lucian had decided that he was having the weirdest day right now. After seeing the message from Petra, and ultimately deciding to accept it, he was just about ready to say he needed a nap. Then this started happening. Processing true dragon factor from Magicule package from 1 Melim Nava. Processing complete. Processed factor has been added to complete Draconic Core, and has resulted in skill evolution. Complete Draconic Core has evolved into True Draconic Core, incomplete, Petra told him then. Lucian stared off into space then, trying to understand what had just happened before asking Petra to explain what this new skill did. True Draconic Core, incomplete, has all the abilities of the previous skill, but now has the ability to store and utilize True Dragon Factor. True dragon factor, however, is not capable of being created independently in its current state, hence its incomplete designation. The Monus explained to him more in depth for him upon his request. That makes sense, I guess, Lucian thought to himself while trying not to freak out at having the ability to store such a thing within him now. Melim, why did you agree to giving me that? He asked the pink-haired Spitfire in a tired voice, wanting to know the thought process behind this decision. The shrug he got made him want to face palm. I wanted to see what would happen, she told him cheerfully, getting a deadpan look from Irene behind her, and a laugh from the two other ancient demon lords. Lucian glared at Ramiris for her laughing at his predicament, not appreciating her finding humor in this situation. In the end, though, Lucian decided that this was ultimately a good thing for him, and let it go. He did make a note to explore this new skill, as well as the new connection with Melim thoroughly once he had some time to himself. There was much there he felt that could be gained and be used to improve himself and potentially his allies. That was a later problem though, the one he faced now was leaving to head back to Eurasania. So after wrapping things up with those that remained, Lucian bid them goodbye and left with his group. Once he crossed over back into the throne room once more, and saw the gate close and vanish behind him, he let himself relax a tad. To the side he saw how both his small group of Surtur and Kushina looked at him with expectation, wanting to know how things went. He also saw a maid run from the room to presumably fetch Phobio for similar reasons. Once the leopardman was in the room, Lucian walked forward and up the steps to the throne that he'd seen Carrion sitting upon when they first met. Eyes followed his movement, but he didn't look back. Instead he made it to the throne itself and sat down in smooth motion. Once he had sat down, he looked out at those in the room that bore witness to his act of claiming the throne. His companions that had come here with him kneeled immediately. Carrion and the two he'd taken to Walpurgis with him did so in the next moment. Phobio and the servants in the room looked on with shock, the message clear to them all. Carrion had lost and they now had a new king. They all knelt after breaking out of their stupor the news left them in, Phobio being the first to snap out of it and kneeling alongside Carrion and the other Beastketeers. Once they all had knelt, Carrion stood up and spoke up for the whole room to hear. As the previous king of Eurasania, I now introduce the new king. Lucian Silver has bested me in single combat and proven his strength in order to gain the crown. He has since proved his character by showing me mercy and thus gained my allegiance. Spread this news to all in the kingdom, that I, Carrion the Beastmaster, recognize Demon Lord Lucian Silver, the contradiction, as the rightful ruler of this land from this day forth. The man announced to all present and received a single sentence back from all his former subjects in that room. It shall be done, long live the king. It had been a few days since Walpurgis ended and Lucian took on the role of ruler of Eurasania. During that time he'd mostly been held up in the royal quarters, specifically the study, that from the slight amount of dust that was on every surface within it had gone more or less unused by Carrion during his rule. Lucian was spending his time there instead of anywhere else for a few reasons. First and foremost being that he had decided to go through the process of being briefed on all the inner workings of the nation he now ruled as soon as possible. One might think that such a thing could wait until after a proper coronation. Apparently the thing that happened after returning from the banquet didn't count much to his frustration, but there was a problem with that. Mainly the fact that such an event was meant to be witnessed by the people of the nation at large, and thus also warranted a festival of some kind. It made sense in a way though for such an event to be treated with such importance, even more than in human nations. For monsters the changing of a leader was rare after all. Carrion had been ruling for close to 500 years for instance. Meaning that it had been 500 years since an event like this had taken place. That all meant planning for the festival needed to take place, including setting a proper date for it. It also meant that they had to wait for people from all over the country to come to the capital, though more so outside the capital due to the laws of how only the strong were allowed in, to come and bear witness to the occasion. Lucian had tried to argue against doing all this but was promptly ignored by everyone, even his spawn not taking any pity on him, and being the most insistent that the event needed to be grand. It would almost be sweet if it wasn't causing him such a headache. But that resulted in him having time to go over all the information of how Eurasania has been running before his ascent to leadership. And the conclusion he'd reached after a few days of going over the paperwork, scant as it was that this nation was held together with glue and dreams. Lucian believed, fully and completely, that if this had been a nation of humans it would have ultimately become a failed state. Just some of the problems he'd encountered were the facts that this nation was still mostly a trade and barter-based economy. There was no proper census for the citizens outside of the capital, they had no true exports, and they had shockingly little laws all told. Things like inheritance laws were so bare bones it was a surprise to him that family feuds weren't a more common thing. Not to even mention that the country's form of taxation was only based on food of all things, the law being that a certain percentage of any farmer's harvest was to be given to the state. That was it. No one else was taxed in this nation, and to make it worse, at least a third of the food went bad before it could be used anyway. If it wasn't for the general disposition of the lycanthropes being loyal to the strong aka the king, then this place would have fallen apart long before now. Then there was the thing that made Lucian want to bang his head against the desk, the only thing stopping him from doing so being that he feared the desk would break if he did so. Eurasania was known for their fruit, it was a point of pride in fact for the people. There was a major problem though, they didn't trade it at all. It now made even more sense to Lucian why Gazel was so surprised when Rimur spoke of a trade agreement involving the fruit from the Beast Kingdom in canon. In all of Carrion's rule they had never traded so much as a single pair themselves to another country. Sometimes independent traders bartered for some and sold it themselves, but that was a far different thing than government trade. This all was even worse due to the simple fact that they grew too much for their population to ever eat by themselves. Eurasania didn't just have a surplus of fruit, it had a full-blown problem with how much they had. From the reports Lucian read it was said that an estimated half of all fruit grown here goes bad before it can be eaten. It legitimately baffled him to be honest, until he looked more into things. This lack of trade for their fruit was more than just incompetence. The fact was that Eurasania had no real trade partners to trade with. Frey's territory was closest but was also impossible currently. Something that hadn't been mentioned in the series Lucian had watched was that the nation of Fulbrosia had bad history with Eurasania. Back before Carrion and Frey became demon lords they actually had quite the rivalry, one that went back multiple generations even. The ruler of Eurasania and the queen of Fulbrosia were known to be enemies for centuries even before their time. It was a mixture of natural aggression from both sides, and a desire for more territory. So that made their closest neighbor out as a trade partner, while Carrion was still the leader even after the two ceased hostilities after becoming demon lords. The bad blood still existed after all, and that made trading tenuous at best. Then that left only two others that Eurasania could trade with, both of which weren't viable either. That's because one was the human nations, ones that specifically prohibited making deals with monsters due to the Holy Church's influence, and even if that wasn't the case most humans were too scared to make any kind of deal with a demon lord. Especially one of Carrion's reputation. The other was Malim's domain, one that was known for not trading at all due to their culture. That left no trade partners left for them to potentially trade their fruit with. Maybe a nation like Dworgen would be willing to trade with them, but they were too far away to do so. The fruit would go bad before it reached them due to the lesser methods of transportation this world had. Eurasania was also unable to properly preserve most of their fruit into things like jam due to lacking the supplies needed to do so in mass. This all resulted in them having a huge surplus of a perishable resource with no way to offload it to others. It was an economic disaster to be honest, but it also provided an opportunity to him. With Lucian hopefully making a better relationship with Fulbrosia possible, they might have a trading partner available. This was added with the help from Petra in remembering all the documentaries he watched on how to preserve foods, and other such stuff. He often would fall asleep to such documentaries, and luckily Petra could find those half-remembered times, and put together the information. But that was just one problem solved out of the many that were present for him to deal with. It was honestly becoming a major headache for him, even though he couldn't even get those anymore. He released a sigh and leaned back from the desk he'd been hunched over for the last day or so. It was as he let his mind wander though that a thought hit him with the force of a freight train. I never told Blake that everything went okay. The Nephilim yelled out and scrambled in a panic at the realization. Alice stood outside the door to his study and sighed at her sire's actions with a smile and a shake of her head. It seems he had some more work to do, and her question could wait. Blake sat back in his chair, happy to finally be in a proper building that didn't house such great evil like the last one he was in. Him and his army had made it to Noctis's home just the day before, right after nightfall. That had thankfully meant he could sleep in a real bed last night. As such, Blake felt refreshed and ready to keep going. Arion had also been put up in the nice stables that Noctis had on his grounds, and was a happy steed indeed after that. Apparently the steed had a preference for apples, and the stables here had plenty of them for him, so he was happy as could be. The young king meanwhile was relaxing for the first time in a while, and was enjoying the quiet of his private quarters. That was until a thought communication came through to him, and the voice of his brother came through. "I am so sorry for not getting to you sooner. I successfully became a demon lord and am now in charge of Eurysania, but I've been drowning in paperwork ever since." The nearly panicked and extremely tired voice of Lucian came through to him then. Blake just sat with that message for a moment before doing the only thing that made sense for him to do at that moment. He laughed in his brother's face. "Ha ha ha ha. The great and powerful demon lord and army killer Lucian Silver is being outdone by some paperwork. That's hilarious." Blake proceeded to tease his brother mercilessly about his plight. The redhead was happy to find some humor after the last few days, and what he'd seen in the Mastiff territory. And his brother's suffering was the perfect way to find some in his opinion. "Oh, shut it. I bet you'd be doing even worse in my place, Blake. See if I help you with your paperwork hell that awaits you when you take your throne now," Lucian responded, sounding purposefully petulant and making them both laugh after a moment. Following that short exchange, the two of them decided to catch up and talk about all that had been happening in their time apart. Lucian told him how he'd met the now former ruler of Eurysania, and how the meeting with the other demon lords went. It was a bit of a surprise to find out that Surtur was related to the earthquake himself in such a direct way, but in the end Blake just chalked it up to the insane luck that seemed to be present in his brother's life. It was just like Lucian to stumble across the nephew of one of the most powerful people in the world and recruit them in his mind. Blake chose not to think about the luck his brother had in finding the person to become the first ever human to have a dual hero's egg in history in the form of himself. That way led to madness, he was sure. The redhead then told Lucian about his own adventures, including the event with Arion, and what had happened at the castle of the Mastiffs. Lucian returned the earlier teasing when he heard about the ill-chosen flight that he and his steed had gone on, just like Blake had expected. His brother also offered his condolences for what he'd seen at the castle, knowing that such sights affected him deeply. Blake was glad to have his brother to confide in, both his fears and doubts. When he'd asked his brother if he'd done the right thing, his answer made him feel better. "Do you feel guilty about it?" Lucian had asked him in a serious voice. Blake took a moment to think, then, looking within himself for the answer to that question. In the end he only had one answer to give though. "No, I don't, not in the slightest," he admitted, like he was confessing a sin to a preacher. Lucian spoke then in such a way that he could tell a gentle smile was on his face even so far away as he was. "Then you did the right thing, Blake. You're a good man, and I trust that if such a thing doesn't inspire guilt in one like you, then it must have been the right thing to do," was the Nephilim's response, words spoken as if stating fact. Blake took some comfort in that his brother had such faith in him. It made him feel more grounded in his decision, more certain than he was before. Only a single man had died and a monument to pain had been destroyed. In its place now stood a reminder that would hopefully prevent further suffering. Such was the action he took, and he no longer doubted at all if it was the right decision. Perhaps in truth he never did, but he still wished to hear someone he respected and trusted like he did Lucian tell him the same. In the end it didn't matter either way. Blake was confident in his action now, and would stop second-guessing himself as much from now on. The conversation between the brothers ended soon after, and Blake looked now at the papers at his desk. He may have teased his brother about his large amount of paperwork, but that didn't mean he didn't have some of his own. It was mostly reports on his men, and the supplies they had thankfully, not something he needed to sign or anything. Though the young king also knew that such easy paperwork was to be a rarity in his future, the drunken complaints from both Richard and Noctis made it clear the hell he had in store for himself once he claimed his throne properly. For now though I'll focus on actually getting the damn chair first, Blake murmured to himself before diving into the reports. Aerie walked around the camp after her session with Miss Harley. Everyone smiled at her as she passed them by, waving at her or giving her a small greeting before being on their way. None of them moved to pat her head or any such thing, they all had learned not to do that after the first time. A nice old woman had tried to pat her on the head, after giving her some food from the cooking fire, and Aerie had panicked. Thankfully, no one had been hurt, and the granny liked the fact she had less wrinkles now due to the small discharge of her kerpower that had hit her. Aerie had stopped it almost as soon as the bolt of energy left her horn due to her added control now, but the incident still made it quite clear to everyone, no sudden physical contact with the horned girl with silver hair. The little one wandered around for a bit, trying to find the few kids that had become her friends. Though they were more so just the ones she played games with after being encouraged by Miss Harley. The ogre kids liked her the best, something about her horn making her an honorary ogre or something made them include her more readily than the others. Aerie still only did it mostly because Miss Harley said it was a good thing to SOC make friends with others her age. She'd been having sessions with Miss Harley since shortly after coming to this place. They often just talked about whatever Aerie wanted with the nice lady, sometimes asking about topics she didn't really want to talk about like her past. It had taken a few sessions before she even mentioned Overhaul to her, and that was only after seeing who she now knew as a Tengu visitor come down freaking her out. She had thought that they had somehow found her again, and almost had what Miss Harley called a panic attack. Thankfully, Miss Harley was near her at the time, and helped calm her down. Afterwards Aerie told her a little about Overhaul, and how he wore a bird mask that looked a bit like what the Tengu wore. After that Miss Harley had helped teach her some things to do when she felt her panic come forth, and they'd been helping her. Things like how to breathe in a rhythm that calmed her down and such. Aerie liked Miss Harley a lot because of that. She even helped more people than just her. Miss Harley helped some of the others in the camp, that looked like how she did sometimes, and they usually looked better after their own sessions with Miss Harley. It was like she was a hero, like she'd heard the bird men talk about. She had an odd reaction when Aerie called her one though, water had seemed to come from her eyes a bit, and it took her reassuring the silver-haired girl that it wasn't tears of sadness or pain. Until then Aerie didn't know such a thing as happy tears could exist, but apparently they could. She was learning so much. Soon Aerie found where the group of kids she usually played with and saw them kicking a leather ball around. One of the adults was a leather worker, and knew how to make one, so they gave it to the kids to play with. This led to them all playing simple games like Monkey in the Middle, and what Miss Harley called soccer. It was fun for them all, Aerie included. Soon one of the ogre kids saw her, and waved her over to come play. Rushed over, a faint foreign sensation of a tugging at her lips coming to her, as she did so that went away soon after. I'm glad that light took me here, Aerie thought to herself before joining in on the game they were playing. Created by Lord_Leviathan. Thanks for all your help, man. Present status Lucian Silver EP, 4,765,942 rank, Super Awakened class Danger Level, Disaster class. Race, Harmonious Nephilim, Demon Lord, Chawa no Nefarimu, Mal, Blessing, Demon Lord Lucian Silver's Blessing, Mal Lucian Silver no Shukufuka Title, Nun Magic, Elemental Summoning, Genso Shoken Flame Magic, Kane Meho, Water Magic, Miza Meho. Earth Magic, Tsuchi Meho, Wind Magic, Kaze Meho, Barrier Magic, Kekai Meho, Ice Magic, Kori Meho, Spatial Magic, Kukin Meho, Recovery Magic, Kaifuka Meho. Light Magic, Hikari Meho, Darkness Magic, Yami Meho, Dark Magic, Kuro Meho, Life Magic, Saimai Meho, Creation Magic, Sozo Meho, Flight Magic, Hiko Meho. Gravity Magic, Jurioka Meho, Elemental Magic, Genso Meho, Contract Magic, Kiyaka Meho, Eclipse Magic, Shoka Meho. Intrinsic Skills, Possession, Hyoi, Infinite Regeneration, Mugen Seze. Demon Lord's Haki, Mao no Haki Universal Perception, Bano Chikaku Universal Thread, Unibasarujaredo Ultimate Skills, Puriel, Lord of Souls, Tamashi no Origi Purieru Mephistopheles, Lord of Contracts, Mephistopheresu, Kyaku no Omo Hestia, Lord of Hearth and Flame, Hisusha, Aro Tahano no Megami. Harmonia, Lord of Balance, Harmonia, Kinko no Omo Unique Skills, Progenitor of Grey, Hai no Sashisha, Horde Lord, Mur no Origi Extra Skills, Complete Draconic Core, Kanzen Ryukaku Spatial Manipulation, Kuken Sosa, Multilayer Barrier, Taja Kekai. Ice Manipulation, Kori Sosa, Presence Detection, Sanzai Kongchi, Sensory Field, Konkaku Ryoiki, Magic Aura, Marioku Aura, Gravity Manipulation, Jurioku Sosa, Instinctive Reaction, Hano Hano. Carnage, Jaya Kasatsu Absorption, Kyushu Dissolve, Yokai, Enhanced Body, Kyoka Shintai, Strengthened Body, Shintai Kyoka, Steel Strength, Kotetsu Ryoku. Strengthen, Kyoka, Ultra Smell, Chokyukaku Mana Jamming, Marioku Bogai, Presence Concealment, Sanzai Intaku Body Double, Bunshin, Vine Manipulation, Surushokabutsu no Sosa. Photosynthesis, Kagosei Common Skills, Tracking, Suiseki, Thought Communication, Shikoden Tatsu Paralyzing Breath, Mahikokyu Poison Breath, Doku Iki Resistances, Pain Nullification, Tsukakamuko. Holy Demonic Attack Resistance, Saima Kogiki Teisei, Natural Effects Nullification, Shurzen Kokamuko Ka, Abnormal Condition Nullification, Ijo Jotai no Muko Ka, Spiritual Attack Resistance, Seishin Kogiki Teisei, Spatial Attack Resistance, Kuken Kogiki Teisei, Puriel, Lord of Souls. Thought Acceleration, Shikokasoku Analytical Appraisal, Kaiseki Kantiai, Parallel Calculation, Eritsu Enzen, Chant Annulment, Aisho Haki, All of Creation, Shinrabansho, Spirit Investigation, Siriai Chosa. Skill Dissection, Sukuru Kaibwa, Soul Integration, Tamashi Togo Alteration, Norioku Kaihen, Soul Link, Tamashi Ketsugo, Soul Storage, Tamashi no Hokunkeo Hestia, Lord of Hearth and Flame. Flame Domination, Kane Shurhai, Flame Attack Nullification, Kane Kogiki Mukoka, Thermal Fluctuation Resistance, Netsuhendo Teisei, Esoteric Flame Manipulation, Hien Sosa, Esoteric Flame Transformation, Haiden no Hano no Henshin, Elemental Flame Domination, Genso no Hano no Shurhai. Ember Creation, Inbakurishan, Ember Bestowment, Enbajuyo, Mephistopheles, Lord of Contracts, Abstract Asset Trading, Chusho Shursan Torihiki, Soulbound Agreement, Tamashi Shirbari Kiyaku Binding Enforcement, Kasoku Kyosei. Magicule Augmentation, Maso Zafuku Retaliation, Hafuku Soul Contract, Tamashi no Kiyaku Harmonia, Lord of Balance, In Domination, In no Shurhai, Yang Domination, Yen Shurhai. Holy Demonic Reversal, Saima Hanton, Harmonize, Chawa Disperse, Bunsan Sa Seru Composite Resistance, Fukugo Taiko, Progenitor of Grey, Demonic Lineage, Akuma no En. Soul Imbuement, Tamashi Fyo Ruler of Grey, Hai no Shiheisha, Horde Lord, Forced Will, Kyosei Ishi, Shared Perception, Kyoyu Chikaku Soul Harvest, Tamashi Shikaku. Collective Strength, Shuden Ryoku Complete Draconic Core, Dragon Factor Storage, Ryu Inchi Kakuno, Dragon Factor Release, Ryu Inchi Kaiho, Dragon Mode, Ryu Kitai, Body Armor, Shintai Soko. Previous Unique Skills, Integrated, Unique Skills, Grim Reaper, Shinigami, Retaliator, Hafukusha, Grim Reaper, Soul Absorption, Tamashi Kyushu, Skill Mimicry, Sukuru Jitai. Both subskills of Grim Reaper were fused and optimized into Soul Integration under Puriel, Retaliator, Cognizant, Cognizanto, Pinpoint Location, Saikakuna Ichi Joho, Decide Fate, Unmiai Okimuru. All three subskills of Retaliator were fused and optimized into Retaliation under Mephistopheles. Blake Brightheart EP, 998,539 rank, Special S Class Danger Level, Calamity Class Race, Enlightened, Chosen Hero Egg, Kaijisha, Arabareshi Iyu no Tamago, Blessing of the Elemental Queen, Genso no Ju no Kago. Title, Nun Magic, Elemental Summoning, Genso Shoken, Enchantment Magic, Fu Meiho, Engraving Magic, Kakwin Meiho, Elemental Magic, Genso Meiho. Intrinsic Skills, None. Ultimate Skills, None. Unique Skills, Diligence, Kinben, Magical Arms Maker, Madogu Saizoshi, Heroic Inspiration, Ayudakina Inspiration. Extra Skills, sensory field, Kankaku Ryoiki, universal perception, Bano Chikaku. Magic aura, Marioku aura, spatial manipulation, Kukan Sosa, gravity manipulation, Jurioka Sosa, material creation, Bushitsu Sozo, darkness domination, Yami Shurhai, light domination, Hikari Shurhai. Common skills, none resistances, none diligence, enhanced body, Shintai Kyoka, stamina stockpile, Terioka Chikaseki, growth prone, Saicho Keiko. Magical arms maker, enchant, few magic weapon manifestation, Meiho Buki Gujenka, analytical appraisal, Kaiseki Kantiai, magical imbuement, Marioku Fu, heroic inspiration. Ally empowerment, Array Empowermento, hero's charisma, hero no charisma, hockey, wait until a new king is crowned, EP, 225,908 rank, special A class. Danger level, calamity class race, Demonoido blessing, Demon Lord Leon Cromwell's blessing, Mal Leon Cromwell no Shukufuku title, Conqueror of Flames, Hano no Sifukusha magic, elemental summoning, Genso Shokan flame magic, Kane Meiho. Explosive magic, Bakuhatsu Meiho, life magic, Saimai Meiho, spatial magic, Kukan Meiho, elemental magic, Genso Meiho, holy magic, Sei Meiho intrinsic skills, none. Ultimate skills, none unique skills, degenerate, Darakusha extra skills, fire domination, Kane Shurhai, body double, Bunshin, explosive flames, Bakuin, heat wave, Nepa. Mana perception, Marioka Kongchi, ranged barrier, Enkiori Kekai, flame transformation, Kane Henka common skills, none resistances, flame attack nullification, Kane Kogiki Mukoka, physical attack resistance, Butsuri Kogiki Teisei. Degenerate, separation, Bunri synthesis, Togo EP, 1,085,030 rank, super awakened class danger level, calamity class. Race, Demon Lord, Grey, Demon Rodo, Gyur, blessing, none title, none magic, flame magic, Kane Meiho, water magic, Mizu Meiho, earth magic, Tsuchi Meiho. Wind magic, Kaze Meiho, spatial magic, Kukan Meiho, darkness magic, Yami Meiho, lightning magic, Kaminari Meiho, ice magic, Kori Meiho, explosive magic, Bakuhatsu Meiho. Recovery magic, Kaifuka Meiho, barrier magic, Kekai Meiho, enchantment magic, Fu Meiho, engraving magic, Kakwin Meiho, elemental magic, Genso Meiho, transportation magic, Ito Meiho. Life magic, Saimai Meiho, analysis magic, Bunseki Meiho, light magic, Hikari Meiho, flight magic, Hiko Meiho, creation magic, Sozo Meiho, gravity magic, Jurioka Meiho. Heat magic, Netsu Meiho, legion magic, Gundan Meiho, weakening magic, Jakutaika Meiho, contract magic, Kyaku Meiho, enhancement magic, Kyoka Meiho, optical magic, Kagaku Meiho. Slowing magic, Gensaku Meiho, spiritual magic, Rei Meiho, illusion magic, Genjutsu Meiho intrinsic skills, magic resistance, Meiho Teisei, material creation, Bushitsu Sozo, possession, Hyoi. Ultimate skills, none unique skills, mad sorceress, Kyo Meijo extra skills, demonic deal, Akuma Kyaku, ultra speed regeneration, Tokusoku Seze, analytical appraisal, Kaiseki Kantiai, magic aura, Marioku aura. Presence detection, Sanzai Kongchi, sensory field, Kankaku Ryoiki, universal perception, Bano Chikaku, in manipulation, Insosa absorption, Kyushu common skills, none. Resistances, flame attack resistance, Kane Kogiki Teisei, mad sorceress, magical power perception, Marioku Kongchi, observing eye, Kansatsu Gon, body double, Bunshin parallel calculation, Eritsu Enzan. Chant annulment, Aisho Haki, all of creation, Shinrabansho, chant enhancement, Aisho Kyoka, magic attunement, Meiho Karitsu, magic analysis, Meiho Bunseki Alfred Yong. EP, 1,085,028 rank, super awakened class danger level, calamity class race, Demon Lord, Grey, Demon Rodo, Gyur, blessing, none title, none. Magic, spatial magic, Kukan Meiho intrinsic skills, magic resistance, Meiho Teisei, possession, Hyoi ultimate skills, none unique skills, gladiator, Kentoshi extra skills, demonic deal, Akuma Kyaku. Ultra speed regeneration, Chokusoku Seze, strengthen, Kyoka, strengthen body, Shintai Kyoka, enhanced body, Kyoka Shintai, presence detection, Sanzai Kongchi, sensory field, Kankaku Ryoiki. Universal perception, Bano Chikaku, Yang manipulation, Yososa common skills, none resistances, Flame Attack Resistance, Kane Kogiki Teisei, Gladiator, Magic Aura, Marioku Aura. Steel Strength, Kotetsu no Chikara, Stamina Stockpile, Terioku Chikaseki, Carnage, Daijaya Kasatsu, Strength Accumulation, Chikara no Chikaseki, Physical Form Bypass, Shintai Keitai Toppa EP, 565,840. Rank, S-Class Danger Level, Calamity Class Race, Fire Giant, High no Kaijin Blessing, None Title, None Magic, None. Intrinsic Skills, Mana Jamming, Marioku Bogai, Mana Resistance, Marioku Teisei Ultimate Skills, None Unique Skills, Eruption, Funka Extra Skills, Compress, Ashuku Giant Strength, Kaijin no Chikara. Stone Skin, Ishi no Hifu Spatial Storage, Kuken Chozo Common Skills, None Resistances, None Eruption, Flame Manipulation, Hano no Sosa. Land Domination, Tochi Shurhai, Lava Domination, Yogan Shurhai, Lava Transformation, Yogan Henshin, Flame Attack Resistance, Kane Kogiki Teisei, Thermal Fluctuation Resistance, Netsuhendo Teisei Shurzwa Hiwajima. EP, 142,427 Rank, Special A Class Danger Level, Calamity Class Race, Human, Ningen Blessing, None Title, None. Magic, None Intrinsic Skills, None Ultimate Skills, None Unique Skills, Enforcer, Shikosha Extra Skills, None Common Skills, None. Resistances, Pain Nullification, Itami Muko, Physical Attack Resistance, Butsuri Kogiki Teisei, Enforcer, Strengthen Body, Shintai Kyoka, Force Control, Chikara Sosa, Reinforcement, Kyoka. EP, 177,756 Rank, Special A Class Danger Level, Calamity Class Race, Human, Ningen Blessing, None Title, None. Magic, None Intrinsic Skills, None Ultimate Skills, None Unique Skills, Incursio, Incursio Extra Skills, Self-Regeneration, Jiko Seze Common Skills, None. Resistances, Poison Resistance, Doku Teisei, Physical Attack Resistance, Butsuri Kogiki Teisei, Magic Resistance, Meiho Teisei, Incursio, Natural Effects Resistance, Shurzen Gensho Teisei, Thought Acceleration, Shikokasoku. Instinctive Reaction, Hano Hano, Presence Concealment, Sanzai Pei, Full Body Armorize, Zenshin Sakoka, Armor Fusion, Soko Yugo, Summon Armament, Buso Shoken, Draconic Core, Ryu no Kakushin. EP, 234,550 Rank, Special A Class Danger Level, Calamity Class Race, Archdemon, Grey, Hyro no Joy Akuma Blessing, None Title, None. Magic, None Intrinsic Skills, Magic Resistance, Meiho Teisei, Material Creation, Bushitsu Sozo, Possession, Hyoi Ultimate Skills, None Unique Skills, Dark Infiltrator, Dequinferdorita. Extra Skills, Demonic Deal, Akuma Kiyaku Self-Regeneration, Jiko Seze, Presence Concealment, Sanzai Pei, Body Double, Bunshin Compress, Ashoka Common Skills, Thought Communication, Shiko Dentatsu. Resistances, Flame Attack Resistance, Kane Kogiki Teisei, Dark Infiltrator, Shape Shift, Shippushifudo, Sticky Steel Thread, Nenchaku Koshi, Shadow Motion, Kage Ito Convince, Nataku Sa Seru. Kushina Uzumaki EP, 515,032 Rank, S-Class Danger Level, Calamity Class Race, Kitsune, Kitsune Blessing, None. Title, None Magic, None Intrinsic Skills, Beast Domination, Kimono Shurhai, Beast Unification, Kimono Togo Ultimate Skills, None Unique Skills, Kitsune, Kyubi. Sealing Chains, Fuin no Kusari Extra Skills, None Common Skills, None Resistances, Spiritual Attack Resistance, Rei Kogiki Teisei, Kitsune, Fire Manipulation, Kane Sosa. Water Manipulation, Mizu Sosa, Wind Manipulation, Kaze Sosa, Body Double, Bunshin, Spatial Exchange, Koken, Illusion Creation, Genjutsu Sozo, Sealing Chains. Magic Aura, Marioku Aura, Universal Perception, Zenhoi Chikaku, Spiritual Chain Manifestation, Raisa Kenjin EP, 280,346 Rank, Special A Class Danger Level, Calamity Class. Race, Nymph, Ninfu Blessing, None Title, None Magic, None Intrinsic Skills, Elemental Sense, Genso Kankaku Ultimate Skills, None. Unique Skills, Gardener, Teishi Extra Skills, Magic Sense, Marioku Kongchi, Earth Manipulation, Chisosa Common Skills, None Resistances, Poison Nullification, Dokumyuko Gardener. Nature Manipulation, Shurzen Sosa, Magic Plant Synthesis, Meiho Shokubutsu Gosei Harleen Quinzel EP, 119,582 rank, Special A Class Danger Level, Calamity Class. Race, Human, Ningen Blessing, none Title, none Magic, none Intrinsic Skills, none Ultimate Skills, none. Unique Skills, Psychologist, Shinrigakasha Extra Skills, Strength and Body, Shintai Kyoka, Magic Sense, Marioku Kanchi Common Skills, Flexibility, Jinansei Resistances, Pain Resistance, Tsakaku Teisei Poison Resistance, Doku Teisei. Spiritual Attack Resistance, Reiko Giki Teisei, Psychologist, Emotional Empathy, Kanjo Kyokan, Future Attack Prediction, Mirai Kogiki Yasoku, Thought Acceleration, Shikokasoku EP, 110,050. Rank, Special A Class Danger Level, Hazard Class Race, Insectoid, Queen Bee, Conjugata, Jibachi, Blessing, none Title, none Magic, none. Intrinsic Skills, none Ultimate Skills, none Unique Skills, Hive Queen, Haibuken Extra Skills, none Common Skills, Thought Communication, Shikotsushin, Honey Production, Hakimitsu Saizen. Crop Growth, Sakamatsu no Saicho Resistances, none Hive Queen, Bee Creation, Hachi no Sozo, Shared Perception, Kyoyu Chikaku Skillshare, Sukuru Shei. Don't forget to like and subscribe to Novels Wonderland.